Hey, so I've been using the DJI Action 6 for a bit, and the macro lens changed what this camera could do for me. Closer focus, slightly shallower depth of field, real subject separation. But shooting outdoors, even on a cloudy Vancouver day, robs you of that ability to get that motion blur that you might want. And that's where ND filters come in. And Freewell does make a kit specifically for the macro lens on the Action 6. So let's get into it. Now the Freewell ND Filter Kit for the Action 6 macro lens comes in 4 strengths: ND 8, 16, 32, and 64. 3 stops through 6 stops of light reduction. They snap on over the macro lens with just tension, no threading required. So a quick explainer for anyone new to ND filters, think of them as sunglasses for your camera. They reduce the amount of light coming in, which lets you keep a slower shutter speed without overexposing. The filters themselves are really compact, lightweight, and the glass is an anti-reflective coating. Now, before we get into real-world shooting, I want to see how these filters handle color accuracy. Now, color cast is a common issue with cheaper ND glass. You get some kind of a warmer shift usually. So I locked off a neutral scene, locked all my settings, white balance at 5100 Kelvin, and went through all 4 Freewell filters, plus using no filter as the baseline. And what I noticed is that color cast is really well controlled for this kit, as I would expect for something that's not a variable ND filter. I'm pretty happy with how neutral these particular ND filters are. Now, depending on what you're using the camera for, you may or may not obsess over a slight color cast. You're grading anyway, but it's good to know what you're working with going into the edit. Now, how and when to use these ND filters. So these ND filters are really simple to use. Basically, you just put the right one on for the circumstances. But which one is the right one? And it depends on a lot of things, including lighting conditions and shutter speed, and it's more uniquely complicated with action cameras than regular cameras. So as a starting point, what I would do is I'd bring all 4 filters out, program your camera to your desired frame rate and shutter speed. So in this case, I'm using 24 frames per second and 1/48 shutter speed, and then choose an auto ISO setting. Now in general, for a bright sunny day in Vancouver, I'd start with ND 32. If I notice I'm clipping my highlights right away and my ISO is already 100, I'd move up to ND 64 to reduce the light. Now, if it's an overcast day, I'd start with ND 8 or ND 16 and see how it looks and adjust if I really need to. Now, unfortunately, these aren't variable filters, so you will need to play around and figure out which to bring based on your conditions. I kind of start with these really general guidelines, but I'd really play around and, there's a possibility ND 64 still isn't enough. Now, one practical note, the Action 6's variable aperture gives you a stop or 2 of additional wiggle room in some modes. So these are just starting points. Now, in general, I did find the ND filters work very well for its intended purpose of reducing light. It cuts down light significantly based on which one you use and helped me get much better, blurrier shots with nicer background separation. But there are some complexities to think about with this kind of accessory, which I'll get into in a moment. If you're finding this useful, a subscribe does help a lot. I'm putting out regular content on cameras, gear, and documenting family life with a focus on mobile photography. Now, who's this for? The issue with action cams and ND filters is that while you do want to keep an optimal shutter speed based on your frame rate, action camera stabilization isn't through a mechanical gimbal, it's electronic. And DJI's electronic stabilization depends on having a higher frame rate, so at least 1/120 to 160. So if you're filming at 60 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/120, it might not be too bad, but if you're filming at 24 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/48, you're probably going to notice a lot more jitters with each step you take, which kind of leads me to my next point. I find that I use the Action 6 very differently when the macro lens is attached. And now the macro lens isn't cheap, and it gets even more expensive when you add the ND filters. So then I start thinking about cost benefit. And for the macro lens itself, I don't generally want to use it for real action things. I don't see much point using it for POV skiing, hockey, biking, in those circumstances. Just use the original lens to capture the wider field of view. And you can get ND filters for those generally cheaper than what this Freewell set is going to cost you. I'm struggling to find a very normal use case to have the macro lens and the ND filter. Now, the use case I do think this combo was made for is vlogging. So handheld close-up vlogging, face the camera, shallow separation, like about this far away from me. It's very unobtrusive when I'm shooting like this. It's actually very close, something like this, when you're in the person mode on the macro lens. So when you have the face to camera, shallow background separation, natural motion blur, it's small, it's light, and the Action 6 is probably one of the least intimidating cameras you can actually point at someone, which kind of matters when you're documenting family life. Like, I have it in a cage like this, and I think I've just grown it significantly. Most times when I use it, a lot more space, but if I'm just using it as an action camera like this, it genuinely does not take up a lot of space. Like if I'm just holding and vlogging like this. So think of how unobtrusive it is when you're just running after kids with it or using it on family vacations, walking through a crowded street. No one is really going to notice it. And because I have to hold it pretty close to my face to maximize the shallow depth of field of this macro lens, it's just so small and unobtrusive. Actually, I don't like vlogging. This is the only way I would do it if I ever had to do it on the regular. Now, without the ND in bright light, the shutter does climb to compensate and you get that harsh, choppy motion. But with the ND, you're back at 1/50th or whatever you need to use, and everything moves the way, you know, your eyes expect to see it. Now, is that a massive difference? For me, for run and gun family footage that I'm trying to mix together into something I can use over time if I want to make a video for whatever reason, that optical separation is worth it to me, and that smooth, buttery, cinematic look is still what I want to do. The other best use case for this combo is for people looking for really creative close-up shots in bright environments, but I don't think this is something that a lot of people would use because it's starting to get pretty expensive. You got the DJI Action 6, which isn't a cheap camera to begin with. Then you add like a $200 macro lens on top of that, and then ND filters on top of that. It's a bit of a fragile package, which is kind of unusual for an action camera. Now for this biking chain, I think this one actually works really well. It's not really action shooting, it's just macro detail work on an action subject. The motion blur at 150 is kind of what I like to look for when I generally make these videos. It is a stylistic choice though. A lot of time people like action shots to actually have choppy frame rates because I think it accentuates the action. So my honest takeaway is that for true action use, you're better off with the standard wide lens and a regular ND filter. You know, for biking, skiing, hockey, like action things that I do, it's a wide lens. I just use a wide lens, the ND, then done, and then save the macro fun when I'm trying to slow down a little bit. So is the Freewell ND kit for the Action 6 macro lens worth it? You know, I think so, but I want to make sure you understand the limitations of using an ND filter on the macro lens of an action camera. It's not about the filter, it's actually about the macro lens. That's not a filter problem, it's an action camera problem. But for the specific use case this combo is designed for, which I think is close handheld face cam vlogging, deliberate detail shots in outdoor lighting, I think it works pretty well. Anyway, if you found this useful, please consider subscribing. I'm a dad of a camera just figuring things out, one accessory at a time. Until next time, peace.